Well, I left a few things hanging in the lecture, and the first one that I wanted to address, now that we think we have a working application to a degree, we've got a web page for logon. The logon provokes the action logon in the actions table, or actions package, because of the name club logon. And then we've got these return conditions which can send us to different places. And in the logon, we had the data, and so we were just talking before I started the recording that one of the benefits that is viewed for struts is this ability to pass form data directly into variables that are declared in the action without having to write any code to make that happen, and it even does type conversion where necessary. So we've got get and set methods that you declare in the action along with global private variables, and when the logon page sends us the form, which has user ID and password attempt, those get passed to the user ID and the attempt variables by use of the set methods. Now, what we also observed, however, in the execute portion of the action is that we can throw an error right here. We can crash our system if the long parse long on password attempt fails. So when we'll do a quick run to remind ourselves of that. Well, it's taking us a little bit of time to think here. All right, so if we give it a valid user ID and then a non-numeric password, we crash. So we're not catching the exception. And so one of the things that struts has is it has this cycle, and we'll have to. I'm trying to find a good diagram of the cycle, and if I can find it, I'll copy it and post it on Blackboard for you. But it has this sequence that it goes through where the action has events essentially that can occur before it and after it, and you can write code to those events. And one of the things that can happen, or that can be done, is to validate. You can have a validate section in your action object. And I'm trying to find, I apparently did not move myself to the right. The right page of my notes. Uh-oh. Didn't I print it out? I thought I printed it out. There may be a pause here. Oh, there we go. I think I have it. Okay. Too many pieces to these larger operations. Okay, so here we go. You can write, and this comes from the, again, from the extends action support. So the superclass action support has these other features that we haven't tapped yet. And so one of the things that we can do, and I'll come down here to my program below the execute, is that we can write a public void method called validate. And that is a method which, if found in the action, will run before the execute method of the action. So this is an override situation, override of the action support class. And we can do the following. We can put in a try-catch. Now, we could have done this in the execute method as well. Just go ahead and put a try-catch in to catch the problem with the parse long. But then the issue is, well, what do you do? And so in the struts framework view, you're already past the validate step when you get to the execute. So you should do this before you execute. And we will then we'll create a double for the password attempt, and we'll do our long parse long of the password attempt. I brought it in as a string, right? Yeah, it did. Yeah, I left it as a string. Now we could actually treat it as a long, but I wanted to show you this validate feature because it works on anything else. So we are going to try to parse into a long the password attempt, and we can also then just run regular old validation type code and say, all right, if password attempt is less than or equal to 0, so it's numeric but it's not a proper numeric. Oh, sorry. Because that's the way I did it in my notes, which isn't right. Right, long. Thank you. Huh. What do you know? I don't know why I have it that way in my notes. Anyway, so if the password attempt is less than or equal to 0, which wouldn't make any sense, we can throw a new exception that says bad password, and then we can catch that exception. So we'll catch an exception that's either a number format exception or our own exception. I guess we could throw a number format exception as well. But the advantage, the believed advantage, is to use a method of the action support class, which is add field error. So we are going to add a field error to password attempt. That's P attempt. That's the name of the field on the form. And we're going to indicate password issue, and we'll add the e.getMessage. And just doing that much, validate method with add field error will prevent the action from continuing. So it will actually should return. And we don't even have to indicate a return value because we're not done with the action. So we should be able to just have this code and see the result on our form. So we will run it once more. Give it a user ID and then an illegal password. I think that we, if I give it no password, yeah, so we just set the field as required. But if we give it a password which isn't legal, so I gave it letters, there is the field error message So we're back, and so this is also a part of the fact that we built the form using the struts text field and password fields. So this gives us our this little error area for the field, and I can also put in -1, and it'll still say password issue, bad password. So a validate process that occurs at a very specific time and gives you some capabilities. Well, we have now a final issue, and I think I mentioned this was one of the things we needed to do on the end of the recording. We've got a member that has essentially created itself for us by virtue of the is authenticated. So we went through that whole process, which was kind of a waste of time ultimately. But anyway, we moved over to the member.java, the database, get DB data, so it fills itself, and the logon can then depend on just minimizing the amount of code in logon. All right. Oh, and by the way, once we're into execute, we're okay with a long parse long for the password attempt. You could go ahead and create another variable or make the PAT variable global and just use that. But there's no harm. Once we've done, we know the validation has gone through, so we know that the password attempt field that came in as a string is valid for our use. Anyway, so now we have member authenticated, but if we authenticate, we need to move on, and an action is the same cycle as a servlet. So values that you use creating a servlet and that you apply to the request object are still gone after that action cycle. So when action is done, we don't have this member that we want if we authenticated. I guess even if we didn't authenticate when we're going back, you can argue maybe we should have the member. So our job, and there are actually two ways in Struts to do this, and I'm going to do it just the way I prefer, which is I think as simple as any. You can pass data from one action to another, and in a certain way that's special to Struts. But I like the idea of the session because that's what we're all familiar with, and we all know that a session object exists, and if we can get to it, we can just put the member on the session, and it'll be just like we've been doing in our regular servlets. So that's my preference. But to make that happen, we have to add an interface to our action class, and the interface is called session aware. So we're going to say that this implements, I'll bring it down on a separate line, it implements session aware. And that should require an import. Yeah, session aware. Now, technically, session aware is an interceptor. I felt like in the book that I've been using most, the Struts 2 for Beginners by Shaw and Shaw, I think I mentioned that. I thought that their interceptors chapter was one of their weaker chapters, unfortunately, but it is an interceptor. Although it's an interface, so you can just implement it at the action level. Okay, so we'll do the import for Struts 2 interceptor session aware. I say we'll do, okay. And now that we have the session aware interface available, it's saying, hey, you need to have a method which basically retrieves and sets the session. So that, by convention, is done at the bottom. That's the other thing, that it's kind of your style as to whether you put all these globals at the top or the bottom. since I started with everything at the top, I'm going to continue that idea. So here we go. We're going to have another global object, which is our session, and it's a I'll put it up here with the variables. So it's a private map, because the session is really just, for our purposes, name value pair, so it's a map. So we're going to have a private map session, and then as part of our get and set auto methods, if you will, we're going to have a public void set session that receives the map session and sets it. So it receives a map, which we're just going to call session, and sets our global equal to this whatever is coming. So in other words, the action support superclass, if we're implementing session aware, should make this happen for us, I guess is the simplest way of saying it. So we can add the override to that. So we have the session object that's global, the set method which will fill it, and therefore in the execute method we can, let's see where I did it. I went ahead and did this just before the success. So the only time that I put the member on the session object was when I was moving on to my success page. And so what we do here is we grab our object and we put, since it's a map, we put whatever you want to call it. I'm going to call it member and the object. And so with that, which is really no easier than the request get session set attribute that we've been using all along, but this is the way you do it in struts. You have the object map, and then you put your object on that. And if you have the session aware, struts will call that method. Okay, so now we're ready to see what struts will do for us as we move to the next page, the member update screen. And so I think I want to start with the old version of member update. Member screen, and make modifications as needed. All right. So I hope you have that old ClubDB that I was working from. So we've got member screen JSP, and I'm simply going to copy out of my old version of ClubDB into my web pages of my struts version of ClubDB and paste it in. And then we're going to make it struts aware. Everybody have the page in place? Okay. For the moment, I am going to remove the ifs, because the ifs were related to expression language calls for the authenticated. Well, I guess technically you can mix and match. I took them out. Let's see if there was a reason I took them out. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think I'm going to take it out for now. I'm thinking it should work, but I don't want to get things too confusing. So I'm going to take out the JSTL logic that I had in my page. And I don't think I need my JSTL core. Well, I'm going to leave it in there, since I might put that stuff back. We might put it back at some point. But to get our form struts aware, we will have our taglib call to S, so the prefix is now S for struts, and the URI, the resource, is /struts tags. And I have to say that the whole business with struts having its own set, its own UI tools, user interface tools, that's what gives me a little bit of pause, because then struts has to keep up with the changes that are going on in the regular web page world, and I worry about that discrepancy. Yeah. Yeah, it should be in the library. Yeah. Okay. Yes, supposedly it does. I can't say I've done much of it, but yeah, it's supposed to be CSS usable. Because what really is going on with the struts tags is that they have their own kind of subset of things that you mark them with, but then you can also mark them with other regular HTML and CSS coding. So that, yeah. Right, and you'd have, so that's an issue because it's building its own error tag area. So I don't know how much control you have over that. But there's lots to struts. I mean, you can spend the next semester just playing with struts if you want to. But I'm not going to. All right, we do want to make this a struts form. We don't need the ID any longer. I'm just going to take it out to simplify. The action is still member update. Okay, and so inside, and then we need to go down at the end of the form and do our /end of struts form. Okay. But here's what we can do. And it's similar to the expression language, but there are two sides to it. So we know that on our first field, member ID, we want this to go into a member object. And so struts allows you to specify member.memID in the name, and that's how it's going to link this field to the specific set method of a member object. And we'll see it happen. Yes, yes. Struts works on the names. But I think, well, for now, we'll play around. We'll take out the IDs. Okay. But now we've also got the question of the value. How do we get, so the name feature is for the next action. So the next action should receive member ID, this value, into a member object using the set memID. And that's what, it's kind of like the expression syntax where you throw out the set and the first character becomes lowercase. But we also, when the screen comes up, we want to display the value from the member that we put on the session that just before we got to this screen. So you do that with a struts property call. So inside value, kind of like we're doing with the expression language, we do an S property. And the property is, or has a value, so it's kind of odd. The value is a struts property, but the property tag has a value clause in it. So we're getting value within value. And so now our issue is how do we, and maybe I should do a slash, oh, I'm missing a double quote. So the value that goes with the input field takes inside its double quotes a struts property value, and that has a syntax as follows: pound session bracket apostrophe member dot mem ID. So let me bring that all the way over so you can see the whole thing. Okay, so that says fill this value from a struts managed property, and so struts, and remember all of this is still processing on the server side. So when the struts framework processes this property, it's going to go to the session, look for the object on the session called member, and run the get mem ID method of that object, and that result will go into yes, that's the syntax for get this value off of the value stack. So normally a pound sign would be referencing the strut's own value stack that we haven't really talked about. That'll be on the next, sort of one of the next issues that we get to. But it basically says, here's your value, here's your item, your object, member that happens to be on the session, and then the dot is the same thing of find the get method on that object. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing now for the others, and if we're careful, we should be able to copy this whole property entry and just change the necessary gets. So we have last NM. So let's double check member. I think member has last NM as its get. Yeah, so I used, and that's all lowercase. So last NM, first NM, and middle NM. So that was, that's what we want. And we'll come down to this value for first name and do the same. So I'm going to take out the expression language call, put in the struts property, oops, I didn't change it, did I? Sorry. First NM. Oh, and the other thing I'm not doing, oh, this is terrible. I'm not changing the name. So middle NM. So let me go back. So let's review. Member ID has member.memID. Then the name on the next field is member dot last NM, which will do the set. Member dot first NM, and then member dot middle NM. So I've given you lots of places where you can make mistakes because I've been making them. Yes? Doesn't turn it blue. Make sure your tag lib is oh, the other ones are oh, it's only one of these? Right, but for any of them, or just which one? Member ID. But you haven't. But the other properties aren't working, right? Okay. It's probably just a syntax issue because we got a lot of double quotes and apostrophes going on here. So make sure you use square brackets with member inside apostrophes, because the property tag has its own value setting. You're not seeing it? I can come take a look. Okay, we had an issue on one of the programs here in class that the problem was that the struts property doesn't go with a struts text field. So if you tried to change the input type text to be a struts text field, then the property won't be recognized. So this is a regular HTML text field. We're just using the struts property tag to fill the value property of that text field. Okay, so I'm down to status, and name will be member.status, and entry will be status from our session value, then date, so member.memDate, I think, though, let me double check. I think we want member date S because we modified. No, actually, member date seems to work. Oh, that's true. Yeah, that should. Yeah, you're right. So we just member date. Okay, check again. It's probably a double quote issue somewhere. I'll finish my password entry, and remember that this is spelled out, password. Oh, how did we do it? Yeah, spelled out. Did you find your issue? Okay. Okay, and then we do want to make the submit button a struts submit. Oh, I forgot my slash at the end. There we go. So don't forget on your struts submit. No, it's not. I just was doing it for separation. It just means that's the end of the tag. Yeah. And the struts, properties, and submit tags all seem to want the slash. Right. Yeah. Okay. While we're here, we can get ready for the next, since we're on this page, the show purchases. We don't have an action for that yet, but it will be a struts form. As well. Oh, and here's something that was kind of interesting. It happened to me yesterday in the Java 3 class when I was copying from one project to another. The project was working the first time through and then it was failing the next time through because I was using an href link that didn't correctly identify the project. So I was going from one project name which was a revision to the old project which didn't have the code in it. So we need to do club db struts as because that's our project. Okay. And this will be a strut submit as well. So you can go ahead and do submit on that with the value. But I can see we aren't going to get that far tonight. Okay, well, we have a page, a JSP, that should be able to display data from the stored member object on the session and produce its own action into a new Java class that we haven't written yet. And to do that, let me double check my struts XML page. We need to make a change here anyway. So if everyone's okay on their member screen, or think you are, go to your struts XML, because we're now going to move ahead on a success result from our logon action. And so we will move ahead to member screen.jsp. And we will now create a second action. The name is member update. And that action will invoke a class which will be in the actions when we get it there, and it will be member update. And we can copy the success result if we like, because for right now, the success result will always send us back to the member screen. So right now we're going to be stuck on the member screen. Well, actually, no, the member update process, that's all it does. It always goes back to the member update screen. Question? Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and it built this for us, didn't it? When we indicated the framework with struts too. Yeah, I guess because it's processed only by the struts programs themselves, it's understood. I think the struts.xml name is doing it for us. Okay. While we're here, before we do our next test, let's try to build just a real quick member update operation. So in actions, we're going to right click and ask for a new, is it in our list or do we have to go to other? Yeah, I thought it might put it back in the list since we used it once, but I guess not. Oh no, there it is. It is up there. Action support based action. So it is in the top level list. Oh, you don't have it here. Okay, that's so yeah. So we'll do it without that. So a new other. You click Struts 2, and we want an action support based action. Yeah. And we'll click Next, and this is called Member Update. And we'll finish. Oh, on your list it didn't have it? I honestly don't know what the rhyme or reason for that is. Okay, now we're going to get even fancier, we hope. And this was the source of my immense frustration over 2 days. So here we are at what I could not get to work, and it turned out to be something very simple, but I wasn't finding it documented anywhere. I'm going to go ahead and put it at the bottom. We need a private member object to receive all of these form elements that we've identified as being a part of the member class. So private member, and here was the trick. It was so, one of those member. Struts wants the name of your private object to be the same as your class name, just with the lowercase designation. Yes, I was trying M for a while, and then mem, and I finally said, well, okay, does it have to be member? And poof, the program worked immediately after I changed from M to member. Crazy, crazy. We do need our import. Okay, and then all you should need are the get and set. So we're going to have public member get member. Let me spell it correctly though, M-E-M-B-E-R. And that's going to return the global this member. And then we're going to have public void set member that receives a member object, and I'm not playing with this anymore, member object called member, and it does a this member equals member. While we're here, well, I don't know if we're going to have this one be session aware or not. Maybe, no, I tend to do it out of habit. I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to implement session aware. And that will require us to put our private map object session, which has a public void set session receiving a map called session, or an argument for session, and then this session equals session. Okay, now we need the import for map, and then it should be happy. Oh, and it wants the override. Okay. So far, that's all of our action. We've got no, this will map us to the session. So there's only one session object, basically. And so what all this is really doing, it's saying, okay, get the real session and put it into our global called session. Yes. So once you do the set inside your action, then the lowercase session that has it in it. So struts on a session aware will run this set, and this lets us access the session. So we can do puts and gets and whatever we need to. All right, now the only thing I was doing in here, of course, it has to be session aware. I was just not looking closely enough at my code. I want, now remember what's happened. We've been on the member update screen. We're coming from that through the button that says update my member data. And I'm not going to do an update, but I just want to see if the member object that comes into my action is based on the screen data, which I can change, versus the session object member that is still there. So let's grab, I'm going to create a member M. So this is different now. This is safe. So member M is a member cast of session.get. But we're getting the item called member from the session. We have, and this is why it's a little confusing, we have a member, a private object member that's global to this action, and that should contain all of the data from the form. So we should be able to see a difference if we make a change on the form between the member global here and the M that we just retrieved from the session. So I just want to double check that. So I'm going to make a string message, and I'm going to just make it so that the only field that I'm checking is the middle name. So m.getMiddleName should, at this point, continue to be the original member middle name. And if I made a change, the member.getMiddleName should be any change that the user made on the form. I'm going to get my request object. So map request equals a map for the action context dot get context dot get request. Whoops, why did it throw me out of the, there we go. So there's our code to get the, oops, it did a get application on me. I don't know why it did that. Just a get, no get application, just get. So that request should now be the actual request object, and I'm going to do a request.put message onto the request object, and then I'm going to return, whoops, lowercase, I was ahead of myself, return success, which is interesting. S-U-C, did I misspell it? Yes, I misspelled it. How about two S's? So that is the class constant available from the action support superclass. Okay. So if this works as I hope, it will let me see the member after we authenticate, make a change to middle initial. Well, I can make a change to anything I want, but it just doesn't process it. But when I repost my member screen, it's not going to change because member is still the global, the session member. But I should see that in my message on my form that I had a change attempted. Do I have message? Do I have on my member screen? I'm not sure. Did I? I didn't double check that. Yes. So message is down at the bottom. of my member updates or my member screen, so I should see it. Okay, so there's your member update execute action again. Oh, it wants an override annotation on that. Annotations everywhere. And you know, I never did look on the properties of the struts project. Did we specify JDK8? I guess we did. Just latest JDK. Okay, next step is to test. So we're going to try and get A043, default password of 18. Logon says, member not authenticated. Did I change that ID? I must have. It's probably 180. I think I went through this last week, or on my recording. Okay, let's see. Go into Sesame, use Club 294, select star from TBL members. Yep, I had changed it to 180. I think I had the same problem on the form or on the recording. Okay, well anyway, that's good. It told me. It found the member and just didn't authenticate me. So here we go again. Okay. Now I've got an member authenticated. So here are my member data. That middle name currently G. I'm going to change to X, and when I try to update, it's going to go through the action cycle, and I should see that the old was G and the new was X, although it's going to show as G again. Old was G and new was X. So that's kind of cool. A 404. If you had a 404, you need to check. So you need to make sure that in your struts XML file, you don't have a misspelling on either the action, which is member update, or the class that it calls on that action. Now, pardon? Yep. That could be a problem. So the next step, which I finally got working this afternoon, is to add Hibernate back into our program. But we don't have enough time to really make that happen in 10 minutes. So I'm going to stop here, and anybody that we know, I've got a few who are having some issues with the stuff up to this point, we'll take a look at those. No class next week because of the holiday. They've started to give us all off the Wednesday before Thanksgiving. But I will have another recording. I'm ready to go with adding Hibernate and doing some other things to this. So there will be another recording for next week. Obviously, you don't have to. You can do it at your leisure when you're sitting around watching football after eating lots of turkey or whatever you do on Turkey Day. But we're getting there. It's working a little bit. It's doing some stuff for us. So whether or not you decide struts is worth the learning curve, I guess is debatable, but we'll keep going. And I also hope to have that final struts project, the new next project, which will be the last one. I hope to have that out sometime next week too with all the descriptions and specifications.